The moment my sister's fingers closed around the edge of my wig and yanked, I heard the sound before I felt it. A sharp, papery rip of fabric against my scalp, and then 200 people went completely silent. Not the polite, reverent quiet of a wedding ceremony, the stunned, suffocating silence of a room watching something horrible happen in slow motion. I stood there at the altar in my white dress, the June sun pouring through the tall windows of the venue, and I felt the cool air on my bare head like a slap. My hands went up instinctively, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. And my sister Deborah was standing 3 feet away, holding my wig out like a trophy, her face flushed with something I can only describe as triumph. "Now he can see the bald cancer patient he's actually marrying," she screamed. Not said, screamed. Her voice cracked on the word cancer like she'd rehearsed it, like she'd been saving it. And from the second row I heard my mother, my own mother, laugh. Not a nervous, awkward laugh, a real one, delighted. But that moment, as awful as it was, didn't come out of nowhere. You don't get to a place like that without a long road behind you. And this road started 24 years ago, in a city that never stops moving, with a man named Marcus, and a life I'd built with my own 2 hands, one steel cable at a time. Let me go back to the beginning. I'm Renata. I'm 45 years old, and I operate a tower crane on construction sites across Chicago. I have for over 18 years. Before that, I was a ground rigger, then a crane oiler. Then I got my operator's license at 26 and never looked back. People are always surprised when I tell them what I do. A woman my age, up in a cab 200 feet in the air, maneuvering steel beams in the freezing wind off Lake Michigan. But that job made me who I am. Patient, precise, not easily rattled, or at least, that's who I thought I was. Marcus and I met on a job site in 2001. He was a structural engineer, newly transferred to Chicago from Atlanta, and he had the nerve to walk up to my crane cab and ask me out through the intercom. I told him he had a death wish. He said he'd rather take his chances with me than play it safe with someone boring. I laughed so hard I nearly knocked over a load of rebar. We got married that same year, a small ceremony with close friends, nothing fancy. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city, saved up, bought a condo in Logan Square when the market was low, and spent 24 years building something solid together. No kids. That was a mutual decision we made early and never regretted. We had our work, our routines, our friends, and a blue and yellow parakeet named Copernicus, who Marcus had rescued from a pet store going out of business in 2009. Copernicus was 15 years old now, arthritic and grumpy, and absolutely obsessed with Marcus, which I found endlessly funny. Our life was not glamorous. I left for work at 5 in the morning most days, sometimes in conditions that would make a sensible person quit on the spot. February in Chicago on top of a tower crane is not something you describe to people unless you want them to look at you like you've lost your mind. Sleet coming sideways, visibility down to 30 feet, wind chill at -20. I'd come home smelling like diesel and cold metal, and Marcus would have dinner ready, and we'd sit at our kitchen table and talk about whatever was happening in the city below, the buildings going up, the neighborhoods changing, the endless, grinding machinery of a major metro that never actually sleeps. We weren't a perfect couple. Marcus could be stubborn in ways that made me want to throw something. I could shut down emotionally when I was stressed, go quiet for days in a way that wasn't fair to him. We fought about money sometimes, about his mother in Atlanta, about the fact that I worked too many hours and didn't take enough vacation. But we always came back to each other. 24 years of always coming back. Then, in February, a particularly brutal, gray, wet February even by Chicago standards, I got the diagnosis. Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 2. The oncologist at Northwestern, a calm woman named Dr. Patel, who had clearly delivered this news hundreds of times, walked me through the treatment plan with a kind of organized efficiency that I appreciated even through the fog. 6 months of ABVD chemotherapy, followed by targeted radiation. Good prognosis, she said. Highly treatable at this stage. She used the word curable, and I held on to it like a handhold on a crane mast in high wind. Marcus sat next to me in that office and didn't say a single dramatic thing. He reached over and took my hand and held it, and when Dr. Patel finished talking, he asked 3 specific practical questions about the treatment schedule and potential drug interactions. That was the moment I thought, for the 10,000th time, that I had married exactly the right person. I started chemo in late February. By the end of March, my hair was gone. Not gradually, it came out in handfuls over the course of about 4 days, which nobody fully prepares you for, no matter how many times they warn you. I stood in our bathroom with clumps of dark hair in my hands and cried for the first and only time since the diagnosis. Marcus sat on the edge of the tub and didn't try to tell me it was okay or that it would grow back, because he understood me well enough to know I didn't need reassurance right then. He just stayed. I got a wig. A good one, human hair, professionally fitted, a shade close enough to my natural color that most people at work didn't even notice when I came back to light-duty office work between treatment cycles. My foreman, a 50-something man named Dale, who had seen everything in 30 years on job sites, glanced at me on my first day back, nodded, and said, "Good to have you back, Renata," without missing a beat. I could have kissed him. Marcus proposed again in April. I say again because we were already married, had been for 24 years. But he got down on one knee in our kitchen on a Tuesday evening while Copernicus screamed his name from the living room perch, and he said he wanted to do it over. Properly, with a ceremony and everyone we loved, because he wanted to stand in front of people and say out loud what I meant to him, and he didn't want to wait until I was done with treatment. He wanted to do it while we were in the middle of it, while things were hard. "I want to marry you while you're fighting," he said. "Not after, now." I said yes, obviously. We planned a vow renewal for June, when I'd be between my 4th and 5th treatment cycles, and the worst of the side effects were expected to ease. We kept it relatively intimate, about 200 guests, which felt enormous to me, but was a compromise from Marcus's larger family. We booked a venue in River North with floor-to-ceiling windows and warm wood floors, and light that came in gold in the late afternoon. I was cautiously happy. More than cautiously, if I'm honest. Despite everything, the chemo, the exhaustion, the mornings when getting out of bed felt like lifting the full weight of the crane above me, I was genuinely, quietly happy. I had Marcus. I had a plan. I had a future that Dr. Patel had used the word curable to describe. What I didn't have was a clear picture of what was happening with my family. My mother, Carolyn, was 68 years old and had spent most of my adult life oscillating between sharp, cutting criticism and theatrical displays of maternal devotion, depending entirely on her audience. My sister Deborah was 42, 3 years younger than me, and had spent most of those 42 years being Carolyn's favorite, with a focused, deliberate intensity that should have been exhausting, but apparently was not. The two of them had always had a dynamic that I'd tried to stay out of, a closed loop of validation and grievance that didn't really need me to function. I'd kept them at arm's length for years, but when I got sick, I made the mistake of letting them back in. Marcus had concerns about this. He was measured about it, careful with his words. But I remember one night in March, lying in bed while the nausea medication made the ceiling feel like it was breathing. He said quietly, "You don't owe them access to your illness, Renata." "She's my mother," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know." That was it. He didn't push. He trusted me to know my own family. But I noticed in the weeks that followed that every time Carolyn called, I got off the phone more tired than when I'd answered. And every time Deborah came over, which was happening with increasing frequency now that I was sick, now that there was something to observe and report back on, Copernicus would start screaming from his perch in the living room with an urgency that felt less like bird behavior and more like a warning system. I told myself I was imagining it. Then, 2 weeks before the ceremony, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It turned out to be a woman named Patricia, who lived in the apartment directly above us, our upstairs neighbor, a retired school teacher I'd spoken to maybe 4 times in 6 years of living in the building. She said she needed to tell me something, and she sounded uncomfortable, like she'd been sitting with the decision to call for a while. "I don't know if this is my business," Patricia said, "but I think you should know. Your sister has been coming by the building when you're not home. She's been up here, talking to me, asking me questions about you and your husband." I sat down on the kitchen chair slowly. Copernicus went quiet in the other room, like he was listening. "What kind of questions?" I asked. Patricia paused. "About Marcus," she said. "Specifically, whether I'd ever seen him bring anyone home, whether I'd heard arguments, whether I thought the marriage was—" She trailed off. "She was trying to get me to say something bad about him, Renata. I didn't, but I thought you should know she was asking." I thanked her and hung up. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, in the gray afternoon light coming through the window, the city noise rising up from the street below. Copernicus came to the edge of his perch and tilted his head at me. "I know," I said to him, and for the first time since my diagnosis, the thing I felt wasn't fear about the cancer. It was something colder and more specific, and it had my sister's name on it. I confronted Deborah the next day, not because I was ready, not because I had a plan, because I was sitting at that kitchen table at 6 in the morning with my coffee going cold, and I realized that if I waited until I felt ready, I would be waiting for the rest of my life. So I called her. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting it. "Patricia called me," I said. No preamble. A pause. Then, in a voice so smooth it made my skin crawl, "Oh, Renata, I was just worried about you. You were asking our neighbor if Marcus had brought women home. I was asking if everything seemed okay. You're sick, you're vulnerable. I care about what's happening with you. You went behind my back, to someone I barely know, to try to dig up something damaging about my husband, 2 weeks before our ceremony. I'm trying to protect you." Her voice shifted into something softer, more wounded. The shift was so practiced, so immediate, that I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with chemotherapy. "You've been through so much, and you're not thinking clearly right now. And Marcus, Renata, I've never trusted him, you know that. I just want to make sure you're not making a permanent decision when you're at your lowest." I said very quietly, "Don't come to the ceremony, Deborah." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom will never forgive you," she said. "That's not a reason," I said, and I hung up. I sat there for another 20 minutes. Copernicus was making small, clicking sounds from his perch in the living room, the sound he made when he was thinking about something. Marcus had already left for work. He had an early site meeting on the west side. The apartment was very still, the way it got in the hour after he left, when his absence was still fresh enough to feel physical. I thought about calling Marcus. I didn't. He had enough to carry. I would handle this. What I didn't account for was Carolyn. My mother called me 4 hours later. I was at a follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel's team, sitting in the waiting room at Northwestern with a magazine in my lap that I wasn't reading, and my phone buzzed, and it was Carolyn. And because I was tired and because part of me still, stupidly, hoped that she would surprise me, I answered. She didn't surprise me. "What did you say to your sister?" she said, before I'd finished saying hello. Her voice was the voice she'd used my entire childhood when she'd already decided I was wrong about something and was merely going through the formality of asking. "I told her not to come to the ceremony. She is your family." She went to my neighbor and tried to get her to say my husband was having an affair, 11 days before our vow renewal. A beat. "She's worried about you." "Mom." "You're not well, Renata. Your judgment isn't." "Do not finish that sentence," I said. My voice came out flat, which was the crane operator voice, the voice I used when something on site was about to go wrong, and I needed everyone to stop talking and listen. It worked on a construction crew. It did not work on Carolyn. "You are pushing away the people who love you," she said. "When you're in remission, when you're thinking clearly again, you're going to regret this, and Marcus is going to be gone, and your sister is going to be gone, and you'll be alone, and I hope it was worth it." I hung up a second time. I sat in that waiting room and looked at the wall across from me, which had a framed photograph of the Chicago skyline on it, Lake Michigan flat and silver in the background. I had operated cranes that built 3 of the buildings visible in that photograph. I thought about that for a moment, the specific, grounding fact of it. Then I thought about what my mother had just said. Marcus is going to be gone. Not, I hope your marriage is okay. Not, I hope you two work things out. The specific framing, Marcus will leave, said with a certainty that didn't read like a fear. It read like a forecast. My name was called. I went in for my appointment. I sat in the chair and answered the questions and let the nurse take my blood pressure. And I smiled at Dr. Patel when she said my numbers were looking good, that I was responding well, that we were on track. And I held all of it, the call from Carolyn, the things she'd said, in a compartment in my chest, the way you hold something dangerous when you're 200 feet up and you can't put it down yet. I didn't tell Marcus that night. I told him that Deborah had been asking questions around the building and that I'd uninvited her, and he looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Good," and that was the end of it. But I didn't tell him about the conversation with Carolyn, about the forecast. 3 days later, I found out why. I got a text from a number I didn't recognize, just a screenshot, no message attached. It was a screenshot of a Facebook message thread. The account on one side was Deborah's. The account on the other was a woman named Tiffany Graves, who I'd never heard of. Deborah had written, "He's been at her place 3 times this week. I've been watching." Tiffany had written back, "Does Renata know?" Deborah, "No, and she won't believe it anyway. She's too far gone. Let her have her little ceremony. The truth will come out on its own." I read it 3 times. Then I put the phone face down on the counter and stood very still in my kitchen, my hands flat on the cold granite, and I breathed the way Dr. Patel's team had taught me to breathe when the nausea spiked, slowly, through the nose, counting to 4. My sister was surveilling my husband, or claiming to be, and there was a woman named Tiffany Graves somewhere in this situation, and I didn't know who she was, and I didn't know if any of it was real or if it was constructed, and both possibilities were awful in completely different ways. If it was real, my marriage was not what I thought it was. If it was constructed, if Deborah had fabricated or staged this, sent it to me anonymously, timed it for 1 week before the ceremony, then my sister was not worried about me. She was trying to destroy me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Marcus in the dark, listening to him breathe, watching the light from the city come through the curtain, the way it always did, that particular amber gray of Chicago at night, and I thought about 24 years. About the intercom at the job site, about him sitting on the edge of the bathtub while I cried with fistfuls of my own hair, about the way he'd said, "I want to marry you while you're fighting." I thought, I need to know the truth before I do anything else. The next morning after Marcus left, I called in every favor I had from 18 years on job sites. Construction work runs on a web of people who owe each other things, small debts, professional courtesies, information. I knew a man named Terrence who ran security for 3 commercial buildings on the north side and who had access to exterior camera footage in the surrounding blocks. Deborah had claimed she'd been watching. Watching from where? I texted Terrence. He called me back in 11 minutes. "What do you need?" he said. I told him the address of our building and the cross streets. I told him the dates Deborah had referenced in the screenshot. I told him I needed to know if there was any footage of a woman matching Deborah's description. Short, heavy-set, dark coat, usually carrying a large tote bag, in the vicinity on those dates. "Give me 24 hours, Terrence said. I also looked up Tiffany Graves. It took me about 40 minutes of careful searching. LinkedIn, Facebook, a People Finder site I paid $12 to access before I found her. Tiffany Graves was 31 years old, lived in Wicker Park, and worked as an administrative coordinator for an architecture firm on the west side. The same architecture firm where Marcus's engineering company had a standing contract. My stomach dropped, but I kept looking. Because the thing about being a crane operator, the thing that keeps you alive up there, is that you don't react to what something looks like. You rank to what something actually is. You gather the full picture first. You wait for the load to stabilize before you make a move. I found Tiffany Graves's Instagram. It was mostly public. I scrolled back 6 months, looking for anything, any detail that would tell me something real. What I found, buried in a post from 4 months ago, was a photo of an office birthday party. 6 people around a conference table with a sheet cake, and there, in the back of the frame, standing slightly apart from the group, was a woman I recognized immediately. Deborah. My sister was in a photograph from Tiffany Graves's office, 4 months ago, before Marcus had ever had a reason to be in that building. I sat with that for a long time. Then I forwarded the screenshot I'd received, the anonymous one with the Facebook messages, to my email, saved the Instagram photo, and started a folder on my laptop. I labeled it simply documentation. Because I had been a crane operator for 18 years, I knew how to build something that would hold weight, and I had just decided that whatever was happening here, whatever my sister and my mother had set in motion, I was not going to meet it with panic or confrontation or another phone call I'd regret. I was going to build a case. Terrence came back to me the following evening while I was making dinner, and Marcus was in the other room talking to Copernicus, which was a thing he did with complete sincerity and without embarrassment, and which I had always loved about him. Terrence had pulled footage from 2 camera angles. He'd found Deborah on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks, standing on the corner across from our building, on one occasion for over an hour. Watching the entrance, logging comings and goings, there was no footage of Marcus leaving with anyone, no footage of any woman entering or exiting our building with him, nothing that supported what Deborah had written. What there was, on the second occasion, was footage of Deborah on her phone, clearly taking photographs of the building entrance, and standing next to her, half in frame, was a woman I now recognized as Tiffany Graves. They had been there together. I saved Terrence's summary to my documentation folder. I ate dinner with Marcus that night, and I listened to him talk about the structural challenges on his current project, a mid-rise going up near the medical district, and I watched his face in the kitchen light, the face I had been looking at for 24 years, and I felt something settle in my chest, like a beam finding its bearing. 7 days before the ceremony, I made an appointment with a family law attorney named Beverly Cho, not because I thought I was going to need a divorce, but because I needed someone to tell me what my options were if things escalated, what constituted harassment, what a paper trail was worth, whether what Deborah had sent me could be characterized as anything actionable. Beverly listened to everything I told her, asked 3 precise questions, and then said, "Keep documenting, don't confront anyone else directly, and if they show up at this ceremony uninvited, you'll want someone there who can remove them without a scene." "My mother was invited," I said, "originally." Beverly looked at me. "Do you want her there?" I thought about the phone call in the waiting room. Marcus is going to be gone, the certainty of it. "No," I said. "Then rescind the invitation in writing, text or email, with a timestamp. That way, if she shows up anyway, it's clear she was told not to come." I sent the text to Carolyn that evening. Polite, brief, direct. "I've decided to keep the ceremony very small. I'm asking you not to come. I hope you understand." She did not respond, which from Carolyn meant something. It meant she was planning something instead. I told Marcus everything that night, all of it. The Facebook screenshot, Tiffany Graves, the surveillance footage, Beverly Cho, the uninvitation. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and laid it out the way I would have laid out a lift plan on a job site. Sequence, evidence, variables, risk assessment. He was quiet through all of it. When I finished, he was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "Renata, how long have you been carrying this by yourself?" 9 days, I said. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "Don't do that again," he said. Not angry, just certain. "Whatever. Whatever happens next, we face it together." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice right then. He squeezed my hand once, then got up and poured us both another glass of water. And we sat in the kitchen for another hour, talking through everything, not as a crisis, but as a situation with known variables and a plan. That was the thing about Marcus. He didn't catastrophize and he didn't minimize. He just looked at whatever was in front of us and asked, "What do we do about it?" What we did was this. We hired a quiet, competent event coordinator named Simone, who had worked security logistics for corporate events for 15 years before moving into weddings, and who Beverly Cho had recommended without hesitation. We briefed Simone fully. We gave her photographs of Deborah and Carolyn. We told her they were not on the guest list, that they had been explicitly uninvited in writing, and that if either of them appeared on the premises, we needed them removed before they reached the ceremony space. Simone listened to all of it with the focused calm of someone who had seen worse. "Understood," she said. "I'll have 2 people on the entrance and 1 inside near the aisle. If they get through, which they won't, you'll have backup within 15 seconds. What we did not account for was the caterer's side entrance. I found out later from Simone herself, who told me with the controlled precision of someone delivering an incident report that Deborah had arrived 40 minutes before the ceremony began, not at the main entrance, but at the service door on the building's north side, which was propped open for catering deliveries. She'd told the catering staff she was family and needed to use the restroom. They'd let her in. She'd found a seat in the back row and sat there quietly, and Simone's team hadn't spotted her until the processional had already begun. Carolyn had come through the front door. Simone's team had seen her, approached her, and told her politely that she was not on the guest list and that she'd been asked not to attend. Carolyn had argued for approximately 90 seconds, then produced a folded piece of paper from her purse, a printed-out text exchange I found out later that Deborah had altered to make it look like I had re-invited her, and in the 30 seconds it took Simone's person to evaluate whether the document was legitimate, Carolyn had walked past them and into the ceremony space and sat down in the second row. So there they were, both of them, in the room. When Marcus and I walked down the aisle together, we'd decided we'd walk each other, no one giving anyone away. I did not see either of them. The light was in my eyes, and my attention was on Marcus and on the 190-some guests who had actually been invited, people we loved, and I was holding Marcus's hand and feeling the specific anchored peace of someone who has been very sick and is still standing, still here, still holding on. Then the officiant asked us to face each other for the vows, and I began to speak. I had written my vows by hand, on a yellow legal pad, over the course of 3 evenings. They were not eloquent in any performative way. They were just true. I talked about the intercom. I talked about the bathtub. I talked about what it meant to have someone sit with you in the dark, and not try to fix the dark, just refuse to leave it. I was about 40 seconds in when I heard movement from the second row. Then the sound, that papery rip, and the cool air on my head, and 200 people going silent. I have told you what happened next. Deborah standing there with my wig, her face flushed, her voice cracking on the word cancer, like she'd saved it up for months. Carolyn laughing in the second row, that real, delighted laugh. My hands going up to my bare head and finding nothing. What I haven't told you yet is what happened in the 8 seconds after that. Because I froze. I am not ashamed to admit it. I, who had held loads in 100-mile-per-hour gusts 200 feet above the city, who had sat in a chair at Northwestern while a nurse threaded a needle into my port and hadn't flinched, I froze completely. Every system in my body just stopped. And in that 8 seconds, Marcus picked up the microphone. He didn't grab it dramatically. He didn't lunge for it. He just reached over, calmly, and took it from the small stand near the officiant's table, the way he would pick up a pencil to write something down. And then he turned to face the room, and his voice came out steady and clear and absolutely without hesitation. "I want everyone here to look at my wife," he said. The room, which had been making the sounds of 200 people in shocked confusion, went quiet again, a different quiet this time, listening. "Look at her," Marcus said again. "Look at what she is right now, in this moment. She has been in chemotherapy for 4 months. She gets up at 5 in the morning and goes to work, and comes home, and plans our life, and loves me, and is fighting for her own life at the same time. She has not complained once, not once, and she is standing at this altar in front of everyone she loves, and she is the most beautiful person I have ever seen." He paused. Not for effect, just because he needed a breath. "What just happened?" he said, and his voice shifted, still calm, but with an edge that I recognized. The edge he got when something on a job site was genuinely dangerous and needed to stop. "Is not something I'm going to stand here and pretend is acceptable. Deborah." He said her name the way you would name a structural flaw in a building, specific, factual. "You are holding my wife's wig. You are going to put it down on that chair next to you, and then you and your mother are going to leave this building." Deborah hadn't moved. She was still standing in the aisle, the wig in her hand, and her expression had shifted from triumph to something less certain. The room was watching her now, not me. "I want to be very clear about something," Marcus continued, and I realized he was still talking to the room, not just to Deborah. "There is a folder on my laptop at home. It contains security camera footage of this woman surveilling our building for 2 weeks. It contains screenshots of coordinated messages she sent to a woman she recruited to plant a false narrative about our marriage. It contains documentation of a fabricated document she created to get her mother past security today." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "We didn't confront anyone beforehand because we wanted to give everyone the choice to behave. That choice has now been made." Simone appeared at the end of the aisle. She hadn't needed 15 seconds. She'd needed 4. Deborah set the wig down on the chair next to her, slowly, like something deflating. Her face had gone a color I didn't have a name for. Not red, not white, something in between that was mostly exposure. Carolyn, in the second row, had stopped laughing. She was looking at Marcus with an expression I had never seen on her face before, and I realized with a jolt that it was something close to fear, not of him, of what had just been said out loud in front of witnesses with a microphone. Simone escorted them both out. It took less than 2 minutes. The room was utterly still the entire time. Then Marcus turned back to me. He walked the 3 steps between us and picked up my wig from the chair where Deborah had left it, and he held it out to me with both hands, like it was something worth handling carefully. "Do you want it?" he asked quietly. "Just for me." I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at the room, at our friends, at his family from Atlanta, at my colleague Dale from the job site who was sitting in the 4th row with his wife and blinking hard in a way that suggested he was having feelings he wasn't going to admit to. At the afternoon light coming gold through the tall windows. "No," I said, "I don't need it." I heard someone in the room make a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then someone started clapping, and then the whole room was clapping, and Marcus was looking at me with that specific expression he'd had for 24 years, the one that had never changed, steady and certain, and entirely, completely there. We finished our vows. I started mine over from the beginning. I didn't need the legal pad. I knew them by heart. Marcus's vows made 3 people in the front row cry, including Dale, who I am never going to let forget it. We signed the ceremonial renewal paperwork with the officiant, and then we danced in the gold-lit venue until the catering staff started stacking chairs, and it was the best night of my life. Not in spite of what had happened, not regardless of it, just the best night, the whole of it, the parts that were hard and the parts that were luminous, all of it belonging to the same day. The consequences came in stages, the way real consequences do. Terrence's footage and Beverly Cho's documentation went to the building's management company, who confirmed that Deborah had accessed the property under false pretenses on multiple occasions. Beverly sent a formal cease and desist letter to both Deborah and Carolyn within the week, outlining what we had documented and what we were prepared to do with it if any further contact was made without our consent. Neither of them responded. The silence that followed was different from the silence I'd lived with my whole childhood. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of people who understood that the ground had shifted and they no longer had the advantage. A woman at the ceremony, a friend of Marcus's from his Atlanta days, a woman named Priya, who was a journalist, had filmed the whole thing on her phone from the 4th row. She asked me, the next morning, if I wanted her to delete it. I thought about it for a long time. "Keep it," I said. "Just don't post it anywhere." "Obviously," she said. "It's yours." Tiffany Graves, it turned out, had no idea what she'd been recruited into. When Beverly reached out to her, carefully, factually, sharing what we had. Tiffany called me directly and was crying within 2 minutes. She'd met Deborah at a professional networking event 8 months before. She thought they were friends. She hadn't understood, she said, that she was being positioned as part of something. I believed her. The Instagram photo had shown her standing at the periphery of her own office party, slightly apart, not someone at the center of a plan, someone who'd been used. I told her I didn't hold her responsible. I meant it. My chemotherapy ended in August. The final scans came back clean. Dr. Patel used the word remission in the same calm, organized way she had used curable 6 months before, and I sat in her office and held Marcus's hand and felt something move through my chest that was too large and too quiet to have a name. I went back to full active duty on the crane in September. First morning, back up in the cab, Lake Michigan spread out below me, the city laid out in every direction, the early light hitting the glass towers and turning them copper and white. I sat up there for a moment before I started the checks, just looking, just breathing. My hair grew back. It came in softer than before and slightly different in texture, and I kept it shorter than I used to, not for any particular reason, just because I liked the way it looked. Marcus said he liked it either way. Copernicus, who had strong opinions about change of any kind, spent approximately 3 days being suspicious of it before deciding it was acceptable. I have not spoken to Deborah or Carolyn since the ceremony. That is not a dramatic statement. It is not something I decided in a moment of anger. It is the conclusion of a very long calculation, carried out over many years, arriving finally at a number that was clear and couldn't be argued with. Some loads you don't pick back up, not because you can't lift them, because putting them down was the right call, and you know it, and you trust yourself enough to live with it. Marcus and I had dinner at our kitchen table last week, a Thursday evening in the fall, the city noise coming up from the street the way it always does. Copernicus was making his thinking sounds from the living room. The food was nothing special, something Marcus had thrown together from what was in the refrigerator, which was how most of our best meals happened. He looked up at me across the table and said, "You good?" "Yeah," I said, "I'm good." And the thing is, I was. Not the cautious, provisional kind of good that you feel when something terrible has recently stopped. The actual thing, the kind that doesn't need a qualifier. I have spent 18 years 200 feet above the city, moving weight through the air with precision and patience, trusting the math and the equipment and my own judgment.